Oh, even a dog could do better than that, my husband said, pushing his plate away while his family laughed. I remained silent, but my son, still holding his spoon, leaned forward and said 5 words that made his father go pale. I started to notice a strange feeling as we drove up to Declan's parents' house. It was like an invisible weight weighing down on my shoulders with every kilometer. It must be what a condemned man on the scaffold felt like. Tonight was the monthly family dinner, a ritual that my husband considered sacred and I considered a slow execution. Mom, can we stay at Grandma's for the night? Aiden pulled away from his toy in the back seat, his blue eyes looking at me hopefully. No, tomorrow's Monday. You have school, Declan answered in my place, not even glancing in the rearview mirror. I suppressed a sigh and turned to my son with a fake smile. But we'll definitely stay next time, okay? This time, I prepared especially carefully. I'd spent 3 days practicing a new dish, beef stew with rosemary and thyme, based on a recipe I'd found in a cooking magazine. Declan's mother, Mary Ann, considered herself an expert cook, and every time I brought something to their table, it became an exam of sorts. The car pulled up in front of a 2-story house with an immaculately manicured lawn. Aiden jumped out first, running to the porch, where Grandpa Harold was waiting for him, the only member of the Harris family who didn't treat me with condescending pity. Don't forget. Declan put his hand on my shoulder as I pulled the container of food out of the back seat. Dad doesn't like it when you're late for aperitifs. His words sounded like a reminder to a child, not a 32-year-old woman. I nodded, feeling that familiar feeling of uncertainty growing inside, a sure sign that I was entering Harris territory. Dinner began as usual, with gourmet appetizers, expensive wine, and conversations from which I was gently excluded. Cecilia, Declan's sister, talked about her latest promotion. Harold discussed politics with his son, and Marianne occasionally cast glances at my dress, as if assessing whether it was good enough for their home. "How's your work going, Megan?" Harold asked, when the conversation at the table died down for a second. "I don't have a—" I began, but Declan interrupted. "Megan is completely devoted to the house and Aiden. That's so much more important than any job, isn't it, honey?" He smiled at me with that smile that didn't allow for objections. Once upon a time, I'd had dreams of having my own art studio. Now they seemed like another man's naive fantasies. "Of course," I replied, feeling the words stick in my throat. It was time to serve my dish. I tried not to give away the trembling in my hands as I piled the portions onto Marianne's perfectly white plate. "It's beef stew with rosemary and thyme," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. "I hope you like it." Declan took his fork first. I noticed him exchange a quick glance with his mother before he tasted it. The silence at the table became palpable. Aiden began to eat enthusiastically, but the adults hesitated, as if preparing for a verdict. "Interesting," Marianne said, delicately setting her fork aside. "A little unusual. You use too much time," Declan said in an expert tone. "And the meat is overcooked." "I followed the recipe exactly," I said quietly. Declan pushed the plate away with the same look of condescending disappointment I knew so well. "Even a dog could do better," he said, and his parents laughed. Cecilia covered her smile with her napkin. Time seemed to stop. I felt the color flood my face, and something inside finally broke. I'd put up with comments like that in private all these years, but today he'd humiliated me in front of my family, and worst of all, our son. I lowered my gaze, unable to look at them, and then something unexpected happened. "You're always like this with Mommy," Aiden said, still holding the spoon. His childish voice sounded unexpectedly firm in the frozen silence of the dining room. 5 words. Just 5 words, but they hit harder than any insult. I looked up and saw Declan go pale. His parents froze, and Cecilia nervously adjusted the bracelet on her wrist. "Aiden, finish your food and go watch TV," Declan said in a tone that didn't tolerate objection. But I heard something new in his voice. Uncertainty. The rest of dinner passed in strained attempts to get back to normal conversation. I barely participated in the conversation, mechanically responding when I was spoken to. A hurricane of emotion was raging inside me that I couldn't let out. When it was time to leave, Marianne took me aside while Declan put Aiden in the car. "You know, Megan," she said quietly, "maybe you should sign up for a cooking class." Declan always had such exquisite taste. I nodded, agreeing as always. But something had changed. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the usual wave of shame and inferiority. Instead, a strange numbness swept over me. The drive home passed in complete silence. Aiden was asleep in the back seat, and Declan was driving, gripping the steering wheel tightly, as if it would keep him from exploding. When we got home, I carried a sleepy Aiden to his room, helped him change his clothes, and kissed him on the forehead. He looked up at me with his serious eyes, which seemed too wise for an 8-year-old. "Daddy was wrong, Mom. Your food is the most delicious." I clasped him to me a little tighter than usual and left the room, shutting the door quietly. Declan was waiting for me in the hallway. "We need to talk," he said, heading into the living room. I followed him, feeling like I was in a dream. Aiden's words at dinner were still echoing in my head. "You're always like that with Mom." Not a question, not an accusation, a simple statement of fact that everyone, including me, had ignored for so long. "What did you say to Aiden?" Declan started as soon as we were alone. "Are you turning him against me?" "I didn't say anything to him," I answered quietly. "Don't lie to me." His voice became harsher. An 8-year-old child couldn't think of such words on his own. "You're always complaining to him about me behind my back." "He's just repeating what he sees, Declan." "What does he see?" He came closer, hovering over me. "A caring father? A man who provides everything this family needs?" "He sees you talking to me," I answered, surprised at the calmness in my voice. "He hears you criticize everything I do. Every day, Declan. Every single day." "That's absurd. I'm just trying to help you be a better person. If you made more of an effort." I listened to this familiar monologue, but something changed. The words that used to make me feel worthless were now bouncing off an invisible shield. A shield that came from our son's 5 words. "I'm going to bed," I said, cutting him off halfway through. "We're not done talking," he shouted after me, but I was already on my way up the stairs. In the bedroom, I mechanically changed into my nightgown and lay with my back to the wall. Declan joined me an hour later, lying defiantly on the edge of the bed. Sleep didn't come. In the darkness, I stared at the moonlight filtering through the loosely drawn curtains and thought about how I'd gotten to this point. How I, Megan Winslow, an honors art school graduate with dreams of having my own gallery, had become a shadow, a silent appendage to a successful husband. It happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. At first, it was small remarks about my clothes, about the way I talk, about my friends. "That dress is not appropriate for dinner with my boss." "You laugh too loud." "Your friend Tess is not a good influence on you." And then, when I got pregnant with Aiden, it got even worse. "You need to focus on the baby." "What kind of mother would think about a career?" "No one's going to buy your paintings, and I make enough for both of us." And I gradually gave in. First in little things, then in important things, until one day I found that I had lost myself completely. That I was afraid of my own husband, not of his fists. No, Declan had never been physically violent, but of his words, his disappointed look, his to make me feel worthless. I turned and looked at his sleeping silhouette. I had once loved this man more than life. Now I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt anything but fear and exhaustion around him. "You're always like that with Mom." Aiden had seen the truth all along. He was the only one who dared to say it out loud. And suddenly, I realized I couldn't live like this anymore. Not for me. I'd accepted my fate a long time ago. But for Aiden. What would happen to him if he grew up thinking that this was how relationships were supposed to be? That it was okay to humiliate the man he'd sworn to love and respect? I lay awake until the wee hours of the morning, listening to Declan's measured breathing and allowing myself to imagine a different life for the first time in years. A life where I could be me again. But standing between me and that life was the wall of fear and insecurity I'd helped build all these years. 5 little words spoken in a child's voice were the first crack in that wall. In the morning, I woke up before anyone else. Declan was still asleep, and the sun was just beginning to cut through the curtains. I quietly walked out of the bedroom and went to make breakfast, like I'd done every day for the past 10 years. The memorized motions of taking out the skillet, cracking the eggs, frying the bacon for exactly 3 minutes on each side, just the way Declan likes it. His coffee is strong, with 1 spoonful of sugar and a drop of milk. This routine has become a part of me, but today every movement was accompanied by a strange sense of detachment. As I made breakfast, I remembered the girl I used to be. In another life, I think. Megan Foster, a 23-year-old art college graduate with an honors degree and eyes full of hope. My graduate work, a series of portraits of city dwellers in a moment of reverie, had caught the eye of several gallerists. One of them even offered to participate in a group exhibition. It was there that I met Declan. I remember that evening down to the smallest detail. I was wearing a black dress, bought on sale but looking more expensive than its price. I had my hair in a sloppy bun, leaving a few strands to frame my face, a style I'd been working on for almost an hour. I was standing next to my work, watching the customer's reactions as he approached. "It's amazing how you managed to capture that moment of inner freedom in your eyes," he said, looking at the portrait of an elderly street musician. "It's as if the man is completely himself, even in the midst of the crowd." His words struck me. He saw exactly what I was trying to convey. Declan Harris was tall, well-dressed, and spoke with the kind of confidence that comes only from people who never question their right to occupy space. "You're a real talent," he said later, as we drank wine in a small bar across the street from the gallery. "With the right guidance, you could accomplish a lot." There was no condescension in his words, only admiration and something else, a promise. A promise of a bigger world than the one I existed in, scraping by on occasional orders and moonlighting as a waitress. Our romance was moving fast. Declan worked as a sales manager for a large pharmaceutical company, traveled frequently, and seemed to know all the important people in town. He was 8 years older than me, more experienced, more confident. Next to him, I felt special. The first changes were almost imperceptible. After 3 months of relationship, when I was going to a meeting with my artist friends, he gently remarked, "Honey, don't you think you've outgrown this bohemian party a bit? They're still dreaming, and you've already started creating real art." I remember how his words warmed me. He saw me as more than just one of many aspiring artists. He believed in me. Soon we were living together, and Declan insisted we get an apartment in an upscale neighborhood. "Connections are important in the art world," he explained. "You have to hang around the right people." I could barely afford my share of the rent, but Declan reassured me, "Focus on your art. I'll take care of the rest," and I let him take care of it. It was so tempting to have someone strong by my side, someone who knew how the world worked and how to succeed in it. But gradually, the advice began to turn into criticism. "Those colors are too aggressive, honey. No one's gonna hang that in their living room. Maybe you should try something more commercial. Landscapes always sell well. Tess and that art group of yours are dragging you down. They're jealous of your talent." I tried to explain that Tess and I had been friends since college, that our mutual artist support group was helping me develop, but Declan only shook his head with that special smile that said, "You don't understand yet, but I know better." When he proposed after a year in the relationship, I said yes without hesitation. The diamond ring looked foreign on my hand. I never wore expensive jewelry, preferring homemade bracelets and pendants. But Declan insisted. "My wife should look the part," he said, and I heard pride and love in those words. After the wedding, we moved into the house Declan had chosen, in the suburbs, with a perfect lawn and neighbors who worked for corporations and law firms. It didn't have room for the studio I'd dreamed of, but it did have a kitchen, spacious, bright, with expensive appliances. "You always said you liked to cook," Declan reminded me, when I expressed disappointment. Besides, it's kind of an art form too. So I started cooking. Simple dishes at first, then more and more complicated. Declan invited coworkers and friends over for dinner, and I tried to impress them. Sometimes I got praise. More often, I got reprimands. The meat's a little dry. The sauce is too bland. Next time, use less spice. Each time, I nodded and promised to improve. Each time, a part of me died. My brushes and paints moved to the pantry. At first, I pulled them out every day, then once a week, then once a month. After Declan's particularly harsh critique of one of my pieces, "Honestly, Megan, it looks like something they paint in elementary school," I put all the supplies away in the attic. My friendship with Tess didn't stand the test either. Declan considered her a negative influence and a questionable personality because of her piercings and loose lifestyle. After a few awkward threesome dinners where Declan barely concealed his disdain, Tess stopped calling. Or maybe it was me who stopped answering the phone, tired of having to justify myself to my husband. The pregnancy was a surprise. Declan was thrilled. An heir, a continuation of the Harris dynasty. I was happy too, but for a different reason. The baby gave me hope for a new beginning, for meaning beyond the ever-shrinking world in which I existed. During the pregnancy, Declan changed. He became caring, attentive, fulfilled my every whim, bringing strawberries in the middle of the night, massaging my swollen feet, reading books to the baby-to-be. I fell in love with him again, this new Declan who seemed to finally see me as an equal human being, not a project for improvement. Aiden was born on a spring morning. When I first held him in my arms, I felt a surge of strength and confidence I hadn't felt in years. This little man looked at me with absolute trust, and I vowed to myself that I would be the best mom I could be, protecting him from the world. The first year was a happy one. Declan took over some of the chores, hired an au pair so I could focus entirely on my son. I even started painting again, little watercolor sketches for the nursery. But when Aiden turned a year old, things slowly returned to normal. Declan started criticizing again, not just my cooking or my appearance, but my parenting methods. "You spoil him too much. You can't run to him every time he cries. He needs to learn to fall asleep on his own. And worst of all, if you keep this up, he'll grow up to be a wimp." I argued at first, but Declan always managed to turn the arguments around, so that at the end, I felt like an incompetent and selfish mother. He would cite examples from parenting books, cite studies, appeal to the authority of his mother, who had raised successful children. Once again, I gave in. Step by step, argument by argument, until I was a shadow of myself. Aiden was growing up, and I saw in him sparks of what I had once been: creative problem-solving, empathy, curiosity. Declan saw it too and tried to fix it, enrolling my son in sports instead of the art classes he'd asked for, encouraging competition instead of cooperation. "It's a tough world, Megan," he said. "I don't want our son to be a soft-hearted dreamer who gets trampled on at the first opportunity." And I'd think, how did you trample me? But I never said those words out loud. The morning after the dinner at Declan's parents' house, I went up to the attic to look for old toys for Aiden's school project. Declan had already left for work, slamming the door without a goodbye, still angry after last night. In the far corner of the attic, behind boxes of Christmas decorations and old clothes, was a dusty box labeled Art M. I hadn't opened it in almost 7 years. With trembling hands, I removed the lid. On top lay my last completed canvas, a self-portrait painted shortly after Aiden was born. The woman in it looked directly at the viewer, with confidence and hope. Underneath it were sketches, color studies, ideas for series I never realized. An article from the local paper about the very exhibition where I met Declan, with my photo next to the paintings. "Promising new talent," the headline read. I pulled out a notebook with notes from art college. In the margins were little drawings and notes, plans for the future. "Solo exhibition by the time I'm 30. One of them read. "A trip to Paris to study the Impressionists." Another. "A studio of my own with northern light." None of these goals were accomplished. What I got instead was a spotless kitchen in which I cooked food that no one appreciated, and a life in which I was slowly disappearing. I didn't notice as tears began to drip onto the pages of my notebook, blurring the ink. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to truly feel the depth of my loss. Not just of unrealized ambition or abandoned talent, but of something much more fundamental, a sense of myself, my voice, my will, my right to be imperfect. I cried over the Megan who once dreamed of a world full of color and possibility, and now was afraid to say a word against it. Over the Megan who let love become a cage. Over the mother who couldn't protect her son from the same pressures that broke her herself. But somewhere in the midst of that bitterness, I found a tiny spark, the same feeling I'd experienced yesterday when Aiden spoke his 5 words. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a different path. The week after the ill-fated dinner at Declan's parents' house had been an ordeal. Every morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest that didn't go away until the evening. Declan barely spoke to me, but I could feel him paying close attention to my every move. I noticed that my phone was draining faster than usual. One morning, waking up before Declan did, I found that some apps were open, even though I remembered exactly closing them before I went to bed. My email password no longer worked. I had to restore access. "We need to talk about summer plans," Declan said over breakfast on Saturday, not looking at me. "I think we're going to the lake, just the two of us and Aiden. You might want to stay home and think about your behavior." "What about your parents' family reunion?" "Aiden was looking forward to seeing his cousins," I objected. Declan set the paper aside and looked at me with the same expression that always silenced me. "After you turned him against my family?" "I don't think that's a good idea. Besides, your presence will only make everyone uncomfortable after that incident." "I didn't turn him against him, Declan. You know that." "I know?" He got up from the table. "All I know is that my son suddenly started saying things he couldn't think of on his own. And if you think I'm going to let you keep poisoning his mind against me and my family, you're sorely mistaken." At that moment, Aiden walked into the kitchen, still in his superhero pajamas, and the conversation broke off. I noticed him pause in the doorway, assessing the surroundings before entering, a new habit that was breaking my heart. My cheerful, outgoing boy was becoming cautious and withdrawn. On Monday, as I was picking Aiden up from school, his teacher, Miss Parker, asked me to stay for a minute. Mrs. Harris, I was wondering if Aiden was okay at home. He's been less active in class lately, and I've noticed that he often sits alone during recess. I had to lie, saying that we were having some minor family problems that would be resolved soon. All the way home, I furtively watched my son through the rearview mirror. He was staring out the window, with a childishly serious expression on his face, and when I asked about his day, he gave a one-word answer. On Wednesday, I decided to stop by the supermarket after I dropped Aiden off at school. I needed to buy groceries for a special dinner. I hoped the culinary effort would dampen Declan's mood at least a little. I was slowly rolling the cart between the rows, mentally compiling the menu, when someone called out to me, "Megan? Megan Foster? Oh my God, it was really you." I turned around and saw Tess, my best friend from college, who I hadn't spoken to in over 6 years. She hadn't changed much, the same brightly colored hair, now cut short, the same open smile. Only her eyes were wiser, with thin rays of wrinkles in the corners. "Tess." I felt my lips stretch into a smile, the first genuine one I'd seen in days. "How are you?" "I'm fine. I can't believe I ran into you. You just disappeared from our lives. I tried so many times to contact you." I was embarrassed, remembering how Declan had insisted I change my phone number after we got married. "New life, new contacts," he'd said then. "I'm sorry, it's been a difficult time," I mumbled. Tess studied me with a slight concern in her gaze. "Look, I've got half an hour before opening time. Do you want to grab a coffee? My coffee shop is only 2 blocks away." My first impulse was to say no. What would Declan say? But then I remembered Aiden's slumped shoulders, the tense atmosphere of the house, and something inside me rebelled. I'd love to. Tess's coffee shop was a cozy place with vintage furniture and walls hung with paintings by local artists. While Tess made a cappuccino, I looked at the artwork, wondering how long it had been since I'd been in a space like this, creative, free, full of life. "This is my baby," Tess said, handing me a cup with perfect foam. "I opened it 3 years ago. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur, but I think I've found my calling." "That's amazing, Tess. You've always dreamed of where you belonged, and you always dreamed of being a great artist." She smiled softly. "What happened to that dream, Meg?" I lowered my gaze to my cappuccino, not knowing what to say. How could I explain that I'd lost myself to the point where I couldn't even remember the last time I'd held a paintbrush for something other than painting a fence? "Life has turned out differently," I finally said. "I have a son, he's 8. Aiden, he's great." "I'm sure he is," Tess nodded. "But that doesn't explain why you stopped painting, or why you stopped talking to all of us, or why you look like you're afraid of your own shadow." Her bluntness caught me off guard. I felt tears come to my eyes, and I tried desperately to hold them back. "I didn't," I started, but Tess interrupted me gently. "Meg, I'm not judging you. I'm worried. A lot of us were worried. We tried to reach you after the wedding, but all our messages went unanswered. When Lisa called your old number, some man, I assume your husband, said you didn't want to communicate with past questionable acquaintances." I froze. Declan had never told me that my friends had tried to contact me. Instead, he'd convinced me that they'd simply forgotten about me once I'd fallen out of their bohemian circle. "I didn't know," I whispered. "Jason had even come to your house a year ago. He wanted to invite you to participate in a charity exhibit. Your husband told him you weren't painting anymore and didn't want to be disturbed." Every word Tess said was a blow. I never told Declan I didn't want to paint. He was the one who told me that my art was futile, that I was wasting my time, that I needed to grow up and do something real. "Megan," Tess put her hand over mine. "What's going on with you?" And that's when I told her everything. About how Declan had gradually isolated me from my friends, about his constant criticism, how I'd lost faith in myself, about last night's dinner and Aiden's words, which felt like the first break in the wall of my prison. Tess listened without interrupting, only occasionally squeezing my hand for support. When I finished, she said quietly, "What you're describing, Meg, is emotional abuse. I know it sounds scary, but it's true, and what he's doing is not love." "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I have no money, no job, no portfolio. Who's gonna hire an artist who hasn't painted in years?" "You're going to start small," Tess said firmly. "And you're not alone. I'll help. We all will." In that moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe all was not lost. Maybe I could find my way back to myself. When I got home, I found Declan waiting for me in the living room. His face was pale with rage. "Where have you been?" he asked in a deceptively calm tone. "At the store," I answered, pointing to the grocery bags. "3 hours?" He held up my credit card. "And without a single purchase until 12:30? I went cold. He was checking my spending. I ran into an old friend. We had coffee. "What friend?" His voice got harder. "Tess. From college." "The same Tess who thought you should dump me?" He stood up, looming over me. "The same Tess who was jealous of you and tried to destroy our family? She never—" "Don't lie to me." He slammed his fist on the table, and I flinched. "I've seen your old letters, Megan. I know what she wrote about me." "You read my letters?" I couldn't believe it. "They were in a box in the attic." "Because you have something to hide, don't you?" He came closer. "What else are you hiding in there? What else are you hiding from me?" He headed for the stairs leading to the attic, and I realized what he was going to do. "Declan, stop!" But he was already climbing the stairs. I rushed after him, panic rising with every step. By the time I reached the attic, he'd already opened the box of my drawings. "So this is it," he said, holding up my self-portrait. "All this time you've been hiding from me that you're still obsessed with your pointless dream of being an artist. Instead of being a good wife and mother, You're hanging out in coffee shops with former friends and dreaming of a career you'll never have. I wasn't hiding, I objected, trying to take the painting from him. It's all old work. I haven't painted in years, you know that. But I wanted to. He snatched the canvas out of my hands. You always regretted the choices you made. What I gave you was never enough. Please put the painting down, I begged. Let's talk calmly. Instead of answering, Declan tore the canvas in half. The sound of tearing fabric echoed in my soul. This is what I think of your art, he hissed, tearing the canvas into small pieces. This? Nothing. It's not. Worth it. I stood, paralyzed with horror, watching him destroy a part of me. Suddenly, a muffled sob sounded behind us. We both turned around and saw Aiden standing in the loft doorway. His eyes were wide with fear, and tears were streaming down his cheeks. Aiden, Declan began in a different tone of voice, this is an adult conversation. Go to your room. But Aiden didn't move. He stared at the scrap of canvas in his father's hands, then at me, his face contorted with pain and anger. I hate you, he shouted at Declan and rushed down the stairs. Aiden! Declan rushed after him, but it was too late. We heard the front door slam. I ran downstairs, my heart pounding with fear. As I sprinted outside, I saw Aiden running across the lawn to the house of the Petersons, an elderly couple who lived next door. Mrs. Peterson was working in the garden, and when she saw the crying boy, she immediately hugged him. At that moment, something finally broke inside me. Looking at my son seeking refuge from his own father, I realized that I could no longer continue to live like this. Not just for my own sake that I could probably endure for years to come, but for Aiden's sake. I couldn't let him grow up in a home where fear and control replaced love. It was time to tear down the remaining walls. After the night, Aiden ran off to the neighbors. Something in me finally snapped. Mrs. Peterson brought her son home an hour later, when he had calmed down a bit. She didn't say anything, but her look of understanding and sympathy said more than any words could. Declan was unusually quiet that night, even apologizing to Aiden, but I knew it was just the calm before the storm. The next morning, when Declan had left for work and Aiden for school, I called Tess. I need a job, I said without preamble. Anything. I need to start making my own money. Tess didn't ask any questions, which I was grateful for. Actually, I have an idea. Remember those amazing ginger cookies you made for graduation? My friend Lauren owns Sweet Tails Bakery on Maple Street. They're in need of an assistant. 2 days later, I was standing on the doorstep of a small but cozy bakery with a vintage sign. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I could hear it outside. I hadn't been interviewed since I'd worked part-time at the cafe during college. But Lauren turned out to be the manager, not the owner. When I walked in, she was talking to a tall man in an apron with flour on his cheek and warm brown eyes. You must be Megan. He stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm Noah, the owner of this place. Tess has told me a lot about you. His handshake was firm and warm like freshly baked bread, I thought, and was immediately embarrassed by the comparison. The interview didn't go as I expected. Instead of formal questions about my experience, Noah took me into the kitchen and asked me to prepare something simple from the ingredients available. Don't think too much, he smiled, noticing my confusion. Cook what you feel like cooking. I chose oranges, honey, cinnamon, and almond flour. 40 minutes later, there were fragrant almond cookies with a citrusy note on the baking tray. Noah tasted one, closed his eyes for a moment, then smiled broadly. You are accepted. When can you start? Tomorrow, I answered without hesitation. Telling Declan about the job was harder than I thought it would be. I chose a time when Aiden was asleep, and we were sitting in the living room. I found a job, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. At a bakery near the house. I start tomorrow. Declan looked at me as if I'd told him I'd decided to move to Mars. A job? Why? We have enough money. You have enough money? I corrected him. I don't. My money is your money. We're a family, Megan, he said, as if he were explaining the obvious to a child. Besides, who's going to take care of Aiden and the house? It's only for 4 hours a day while Aiden's at school. I'll make it work. That's blasé, he cut off. You don't need a job. You need attention. I know we've been through a rough patch, but running off to earn crumbs at some bakery isn't the answer. It's not about the money, I countered. I need something of my own. Something where I can… Where you can what? Bake buns? He laughed. Megan, that's ridiculous. If you're bored, sign up for yoga or find some hobby. But a job? Number. I already said yes. I start tomorrow, I repeated, feeling my resolve growing inside me. He looked at me for a long moment, then shrugged with the look of an indulgent parent. Fine. But when you get tired of playing independent, don't say I didn't warn you. The first few days at the bakery were both terrifying and delightful. My hands, accustomed to home cooking, were clumsy at first, with the industrial mixers and huge baking trays. But Noah proved to be a patient teacher. Cookies need to feel your love, he said, showing them how to knead the dough properly. The dough knows when you're in a hurry or angry. In another situation, I would have laughed at such sentimentality, but in his mouth, it sounded natural. I learned that Noah is raising 6-year-old daughter Ruby alone after his wife left him for another man 3 years ago. The bakery was a dream we shared, he told me one day, as we made pie fillings together. When Emma left, I thought about shutting it down. But then, I realized Ruby needed an example that dreams don't die with relationships. Those words cut deep into my soul. 2 weeks later, Noah tried my experimental dessert, pear cake with rosemary and blue cheese, and suggested I add it to the menu. You have an incredible sense of flavor combinations, he said. How about developing a whole line of custom desserts? Something like Megan's Sweet Fantasies. I couldn't believe my ears. Someone not only appreciated my creativity, but suggested I develop it further. I came home that day elated, with a list of ideas for new desserts. But waiting for me at home was the first call from Aiden's school. Declan had forgotten to pick up his son, and the boy had been in the principal's office for 2 hours. When I rushed to the school, Aiden looked small and lost. Daddy said it was his turn to pick me up today, he mumbled. I waited and waited. That night, Declan and I had our first big fight. How could you forget your own son? I raised my voice at him for the first time. I was busy at work. He dismissed it. A real job that supports this family. If you'd been home like a mother should, this wouldn't have happened. We agreed you'd pick him up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we agreed you'd be a wife, not a dishwasher in a rundown bakery, he shouted. And that was just the beginning. Declan forgot to inform me of parent-teacher conferences, scheduled important family dinners during my work hours, and ostentatiously left dirty dishes and untidy things all over the house. When I was tired and didn't have time to make dinner, he'd order takeout, but only for himself and Aiden. You were at work, so you must have eaten, he said with fake concern. But the worst part was seeing how this situation was affecting Aiden. He became withdrawn again, sitting in his room for hours on end. One day I found him crying over his homework. Daddy said you don't love us anymore, so you leave home every day, he sobbed. Was it because of me? Because of what I said at Grandma's dinner? I hugged him tight and tight. No, honey, don't ever think that. I love you more than anything in the world. And I don't leave the house. I just work like Daddy. Only less hours and closer to home. Then why is Daddy so angry? I didn't have an easy answer to that question. The situation peaked a month after I started working. Declan came into the bakery in the middle of my shift. He was impeccably dressed in a business suit, carrying an expensive bouquet of roses. Noah was just showing me how to work the caramel. Dash Mr. Wilson, isn't it? Declan extended his hand to Noah with a professional smile. Declan Harris, Megan's husband. I hope you don't mind if I steal her away for lunch? It's our anniversary. That was a lie. Our anniversary was in 3 months. But to refuse in front of Noah and the other employees was to create an awkward scene. At lunch at an expensive restaurant, Declan was the epitome of an attentive husband. He ordered champagne, reminisced about our first dates, talked about how much he missed our old life, and then, when dessert arrived, his tone changed. "Megan, this work experiment has gone too far," he said, covering my hand with his. "I've talked to a lawyer. If you continue to neglect your responsibilities as a mother, I have a good chance of getting full custody of Aiden." I froze with a fork in my hand. "What?" "Think about it," he continued in a judicious tone. "A mother who abruptly abandons her child for a job at a bakery. A father with a steady, high income, ready to provide for his son's every need. Any judge will see that it's better for Aiden to stay with me. Are you, blackmailing me?" I couldn't believe what was happening. "I care about our family." His voice became harder. "You have a choice, Megan. Either you go back to your duties as a wife and mother, or you can continue to play independent, but without Aiden." That night, I called Tess and told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and then she said, "Come to my place, now." With Aiden, I packed the essentials while Declan was in the shower, woke Aiden up, and explained that we were going on a little adventure. He was sleepy and confused, but trustingly followed me to the car. The apartment above Tess's coffee shop became our refuge for the first time. Declan called every half hour, leaving messages, first threatening, then pleading. I didn't answer. 2 days later, with the help of Tess and her lawyer friend, I found a small apartment a few blocks from Aiden's bakery and school. The first weeks of living on my own were the hardest. The money I was making at the bakery barely covered the rent. Aiden missed his toys and his own room. Declan filed for legal guardianship, and I had to hire a lawyer I couldn't afford. But gradually, the first signs of change came. Noah increased my hours and raised my salary when my line of desserts became a success. Aiden started taking an after-school art class, and for the first time in a long time, I heard his genuine laughter. Most importantly, I began to feel human again, not a ghost in my own life. One night, about a month after we moved in, Aiden came up to me with a drawing. It showed a woman with a huge smile standing in front of something that looked like a bakery. "That's you, Mom," he said, holding out his creation to me. "You look happy." "I am happy," I replied, hugging him. And for the first time in years, I didn't lie. 6 months flew by like a day. Full, bright, real. Our small apartment on the second floor of an old brick building had slowly turned into a cozy nest. Aiden no longer asked when we were coming home. This new house became our real home. Autumn changed to winter, winter to spring. Cherry blossoms were already blooming outside the window, filling the air with their delicate fragrance. I often stopped by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching the pink petals swirl in the air, and thought about how much my life had changed. Aiden's custody battle hadn't turned out to be as scary as I'd feared. When Declan realized that I wasn't going to limit his contact with my son, but only wanted to protect my right to live independently, his fervor waned somewhat. We came to a joint custody agreement. Aiden would spend weekdays and every other weekend with me, and the rest of the weekends with his father. At Sweet Stories Bakery, I went from assistant to full-fledged pastry chef. My signature line of desserts, Sweet Fantasies, was such a success that Noah even hired an additional employee to cope with the increased flow of customers. Some came specifically for my signature cake, Memories of Provence, with lavender and figs, or Moonlight Sonata, with blue cheese cream and pear confit. And the most amazing thing is that I started drawing again. At first, it was just sketches for dessert and menu design, then small watercolors of flowers and fruit to decorate the walls of the bakery. But one night, when Aiden was already asleep, I pulled out a real canvas I'd bought at the art store on my way home from work, and paints. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to paint. I just let the brush move, spilling everything that had built up inside me over the years onto the canvas. By morning, I had a strange, abstract but surprisingly vivid image, blurred silhouettes, as if seen through rain or tears, and a bright spot of light at the center of the composition. When I brought the painting to the bakery, not daring to show it to anyone, but not wanting to leave it at home either, Noah noticed it wrapped in paper. "What is it?" he asked curiously, helping me lay out fresh croissants. It's just an experiment, I replied, embarrassed. Can I see it? There was nothing but genuine interest in his voice, and I decided to. I unfolded the paper and set the canvas on the table. Noah stared at the painting for a long time, not saying a word. I started to get nervous, thinking he was looking for a polite way to say it was terrible. It's amazing, Megan, he finally said. So much emotion, so much depth. I feel release and hope. His words surprised me. That's what I felt when I painted, but I didn't think anyone could see it. You have a real talent, Noah continued, and not just in baking. After that, I started drawing regularly. Every night after I put Aiden to bed, I'd spend an hour or two with brushes and paints. Gradually, the disparate works began to take shape into a series. The story of my journey from darkness to light, from fear to freedom. One day, in early April, Noah suggested I have a small exhibition right in the bakery. We have this wall, he said, pointing to a spacious part of the room where a few old photographs of the city now hung. We can turn this space into a mini gallery. Your work deserves to be seen, Megan. I hesitated. It's one thing to paint for yourself. It's quite another to put your soul on display. What if no one likes it? What if they do? Noah countered with a smile. Isn't that why artists create art? To share their vision of the world? There was truth in what he said. Art should breathe, live, resonate. And this show could be a symbol of my return to my true self. The Megan who had once dreamed of having her own gallery. Okay, I nodded. Let's give it a try. The preparations took almost a month. Noah helped me with framing and hanging, even ordered special lighting. I selected 12 pieces that best told my story and grouped them under the title 5 Words, in honor of Aiden's phrase that changed everything. During this time, Noah and I became much closer. I met his daughter Ruby, an adorable little girl with curly hair and the same warm gaze as her father. Sometimes we would go to the park or the zoo with the kids. Aiden and Ruby became fast friends, and seeing them laughing together was a real joy. There was definitely an affection between Noah and me. Sometimes our hands would accidentally touch when we were working together in the kitchen, and in those moments, the air between us felt like it was electrified. He never crossed the line, respecting my space, but I could feel his gaze as I worked, and it felt good. One day, after a particularly successful day at the bakery, he invited me to dinner. I almost said yes, but something stopped me. I'm sorry, Noah, I said. I really like you, but I'm not ready yet. I need to sort myself out first, to find myself completely. Instead of the disappointment or resentment I expected, there was understanding in his eyes. I respect that, Megan. He nodded. Self-discovery is an important journey, and I'll be here for you if you ever want company on that journey. I learned from Tess that Declan had changed over the months. Cecilia, his sister, had reconsidered her attitude toward her brother after that memorable dinner and subsequent events. She called me personally to apologize for turning a blind eye to his behavior for years. I should have intervened sooner, she said with tears in her voice. But it was so easy to believe that everything was fine, that he was just a strict perfectionist. I convinced him to start going to therapy. And strangely enough, Declan did start seeing a therapist. He became calmer in his interactions, listened to Aiden more during their meetings, criticized less. Of course, old habits don't disappear overnight, but I could see his efforts, and it inspired a cautious hope, not for a reunion, but for a healthy relationship for the sake of our son. The opening day of the exhibit came in mid-May, on a Saturday. The bakery closed to regular customers at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 6 o'clock, the invited guests were to arrive. Friends, customers, a few local artists Tess knew. I was as nervous as if I were defending my thesis all over again. Aiden, in his iron shirt and neatly combed hair, stood beside me like a proper little gentleman. "Don't worry, Mom," he whispered, squeezing my hand. "Your paintings are the most beautiful in the world." His reassurance gave me strength. The guests began to arrive, first Tess and her friends, then the bakery's regular customers, a few neighbors from our house. Noah greeted everyone at the door, serving drinks and snacks we'd been preparing all day. Suddenly, I saw a familiar figure among the guests. Declan. He came unannounced, dressed not in his usual business suit, but in simple jeans and a shirt. He held a bouquet in his hands, not luxurious roses like before, but simple wildflowers. Our gazes met across the room, and I felt a strange calmness. Not fear, not anger, not bitterness, just an acceptance that he was part of my history and always would be, if only because he'd given me Aiden. He didn't come over right away, looking around the exhibit first, scrutinizing each piece. I watched him out of the corner of my eye as I continued to talk to the guests. Finally, when the main stream of greetings had died down, he approached. "Hi, Megan," he said quietly. "I hope you don't mind me coming. Cecilia told me about the exhibit." "It's fine," I replied. "Glad you could be here. Your works, they're amazing." There was no falseness in his voice. "I never really realized how talented you are. Or maybe I didn't want to." He handed me the bouquet, and I accepted it with a slight smile. "Thank you." "Megan." I hesitated, searching for words. "I know that no apology will ever make up for what I did, but I want you to know that I'm working on me. Therapy is helping me see things that I didn't notice or didn't want to notice before. I realize now how much pain I've caused you and Aiden." His words sounded sincere, without the usual manipulation or hidden accusations. "I'm glad to hear that, Declan," I answered honestly. It was important to Aiden that his father be a healthy and happy man. "And to you?" he asked with hope in his eyes. I shook my head, gently but firmly. "Our relationship can't be the same anymore, Declan. Too much has happened, the wounds are too deep. But we can learn to be good parents to Aiden, even while living apart. And maybe, someday, we can be friends." He nodded, accepting my words without objection. Another change I couldn't help but notice. "I'd like to try to be a better father to Aiden," he said. "Maybe we could rearrange our meeting schedule. I'd like to be more involved in his life, take him to sports, help him with his homework." "Sure," I agreed. "Let's discuss it next week. Thank you for coming today. It means a lot to me." When Declan went to talk to Aiden, Noah came over to me. "Is everything okay?" he asked worriedly. "Yeah," I smiled. "Better than I expected." The evening went on. People were looking at the paintings, discussing them, asking questions. To my surprise, a few people asked if the works were for sale, and by the end of the evening, 3 paintings were marked with red dots, "Sold." It was a strange, exhilarating feeling to know that my art had resonated in someone's heart, enough that they wanted to have a piece of it in their home. Toward the end of the evening, I noticed Aiden proudly leading his friends from one painting to the next, talking about them as enthusiastically as if he had created them himself. His eyes shone, and his gestures were so expressive that several adults stopped to listen to his impromptu tour. "My mom is the best artist," he said, "and the best pastry chef, and the best in general." His words filled my heart with warmth. I walked over to the small group gathered around Aiden, and he shone even brighter. "Mom, tell them about this painting." Dash. He pointed to the centerpiece of the exhibit, a canvas depicting a female figure standing on the threshold of an open door flooded with light. "It's called The Awakening," I said. "It's the moment when you realize that there is a way out of the darkness. You just have to have the courage to take a step." "Why is the whole series called 5 Words?" asked an elderly man who was scrutinizing the paintings. "Is it some kind of literary allusion?" I looked at Aiden, who was looking at me with unconcealed pride, and my heart overflowed with love for this little man who had changed the trajectory of our lives with a single phrase. "Sometimes all it takes is 5 words to find the strength to start a new chapter," I said, putting my arm around my son's shoulders. "Especially when those words are spoken by someone who sees the truth when everyone else would rather ignore it." Aiden smiled at me with that special smile that was only between us, a sign of understanding, a bond that no one could break. In his gaze, I saw not only love and pride, but also the calmness of a child who was no longer afraid to speak the truth. We'd come a long way since that dinner at Declan's parents' house. There would surely be many more hardships and trials ahead, but now I knew for sure I had a voice, and I would never let it be silenced again.
Любі глядачі, дякую вам за перегляд, ставте лайки та підписуйтесь на канал. Також напишіть в коментарях, чи погоджуєтесь ви з Дженніфер, чи вона мала розказати все матері, чи ні, чи мала все розказати своєму коханцю щодо свого чоловіка, чи ні. І також прокоментуйте, чи вам сподобалось це відео.